Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 10th, 2022. I think it's important to note that the recklessness of the disinformation warfare coming from the United States is putting us closer and closer to an actual World War III, a war between the United States and NATO against Russia. There are a number of elements that feed into this that just show that there's a consistent commitment to extending the war with Russia, which risks bringing the United States in as a co-belligerent, and also, of course, Germany as well. Now, this includes the ramping up of arms deliveries, the Biden announcement of $33 billion more from the United States, the Germans pouring it in, the British, Johnson going crazy, providing huge amounts of weapons, new announcements almost every day, a bellicose speech from German Chancellor Scholz last weekend. It's just building toward this confrontation, the demanding of more arms from the NATO allies, which continues from the United States, the escalation of sanctions against Russia, the sixth packet now from the European Union. They're sanctioning virtually everybody. And then there are the warlike statements. The Secretary of Defense from Raytheon, Lloyd Austin, for example, who said that our goal is to, quote, see Russia weakened, unquote. Pelosi, the Speaker of the U.S. House, going to Kiev, meeting with Zelensky and pledging the U.S. will support Ukraine until victory is won. Now, there are two recent articles that I think go further towards creating the confrontation between the United States and Russia. The first was a May 4th article in the New York Times on the intelligence being shared by the United States with Ukraine, which the article says enabled the Ukrainians to kill 12 Russian generals. The Pentagon spokesman Kirby said he admitted the U.S. is, quote, providing Ukraine with information and intelligence they can use to defend themselves, unquote, but we don't necessarily tell them what to do with it. Well, the fact that Russian generals are being killed, possibly with U.S. intelligence, does represent a direct intervention. And to say that, well, we didn't tell the Ukrainians to use it to kill Russians is sort of a weak excuse, if you might say so. Then the next day, May 5th, NBC News did a story saying that U.S. intelligence shared with Ukraine helped Ukraine sink the Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And the story goes on to say that the intelligence was provided as to the ship's location, but that was not necessarily the intent that intelligence be used to sink the ship. Now, these two stories were then, the first story, I should say, the New York Times said, well, we can't confirm that it's true, but it may be that the U.S. is putting these stories out there to show Russia its serious intent in success for Ukraine in this war. Well, how dangerous is that? I mean, what's the difference between saying we intend to succeed and actually providing material and intelligence support that enables the Ukrainians to escalate against Russia? Now, much talk has been out there on hybrid warfare, on information warfare, and this itself is extremely dangerous. You know, the idea that you're spinning the stories to prepare for more war, whether it's talking about the defeat of the Russians at the Battle of Kiev, which never happened, or whether it's claiming that the Russians killed civilians in Bucha. You know, these kinds of stories which can't be confirmed and which are not being confirmed. The Bucha atrocity story, for example, the investigation never took place. We never were provided evidence, which is typical of disinformation stories. But the official U.S. policy is that we're not allowed to share intelligence to be used for lethal targeting of civilian or military leaders. So putting out the story that we're doing that shows the U.S. is violating its own warfare laws. Now, this brings to mind the story in the New York Times on June 26, 2020, about the charge that the Russians were providing bounties to Taliban-related terrorists to kill Americans and allied forces in Afghanistan. This was a big blow-up when it came out, and it later turned out to be completely false. There was no evidence. There had been no increase in assassinations or killing of American servicemen. But the story itself was designed to, again, paint Russia in a bad light. And as far as I know, U.S. intelligence circles never apologized to the Russians for putting out the story. Glenn Greenwald has an interesting column on the new U.S. Disinformation Board. And in it, he refers to the intelligence officers led by Brennan and Clapper, who he said are known for being liars. The 50 intelligence officials during the 2020 presidential campaign who put out a story saying that the emails on Hunter Biden's laptop were, quote, Russian disinformation, unquote. Now, this later turned out that even the New York Times and Washington Post verified the legitimacy of the emails. Have the 50 intelligence officers ever apologized for that? Greenwald says there's a, quote, new industry of anti-disinformation scholars. And this is run by groups such as the Atlantic Council, which is one of the leading pro-war parties. You have so-called fact-checking outfits of the media, media. These are all funded on behalf of state and corporate power centers. And Greenwald said that this whole industry is a sham. And he said it's really part of a campaign designed to, quote, discredit dissent and justify censorship, unquote, which is precisely what Nina Yankovic did when she was first announced as the new disinformation czarina. Now, this is not a way to conduct diplomacy or policy. It's not a way to conduct a war. The whole point here is that this is designed to inflict maximum damage on Russia while claiming that we're hands off. It's not really being done by us. Instead, there has to be a diplomatic solution, not more war, negotiation. The West, NATO, the United States, the United Kingdom must stop this policy before every citizen of Ukraine is killed, but the collateral damage now is the ongoing accelerated collapse of the world food supply, of energy resources, and of the shipment, the capability of moving goods. We're seeing a breakdown of the whole world economy related to this war. Now, the diplomatic solution has to start with President Putin's insistence that there must be security guarantees for all nations. And this is the starting point for a solution. And this is what the Schiller Institute and Helga Zepp-LaRouche have been campaigning for. Now, in this context, there was an interesting call to disband NATO, which came from retired Italian General Fabio Mini. He was a former commander of the NATO KFOR forces that were involved in the Kosovo War. And he said, NATO has become, quote, a threat to security in Europe, unquote. And he said, instead, we need a new regional security structure which puts the interests of European nations ahead of those of the United States. Now, given that the United States is engaged in disinformation campaigns and is ultimately aiming at the destruction of a nuclear superpower, Russia, is that in the interests of European sovereign nation states? Obviously not. And it's for this reason, among others, that NATO has outlived its purposes, NATO should be disbanded, and that should be part of a step toward a full development of a new security and financial architecture. So that's my report for today. I'll be back with you tomorrow.